when does this get easier to do? I don't understand why this is hard. Hi, I'm Sophie, and today's video is going to be thoughts on Avengers Endgame. So this video is going to be full of spoilers, and if you still haven't seen it, go watch the film, then come back and watch this, because I could try and do a spoiler-free version, but realistically, I want to talk about some spoilery shit, and I'm the kind of person who's like, I don't even want to know if people liked it before I go into a film, so go watch the film first, and then we can talk. I've seen Endgame 3 times now, and I would happily see it again. I probably will see it again. Like, almost definitely. I could go and see it before Spider-Man if it's still in cinemas. The first time I went to see it was at a double bill screening at the View in Leicester. It started with Infinity War at 9 o'clock, or like 9:30, and then there was a bit of a break, and then at midnight, Endgame started. I went with 16 other people, including both of my parents, my brother, his housemates, and a whole shit ton of my friends. It was interesting. They had basically blocked out every single screen in the whole cinema to show Endgame. 2 of them were doing a double bill, so we were in one of them. That had sold out so fast that they put on a second double bill showing. There are 12 screens in this cinema. Every single other one was showing Endgame at midnight. We went out during the gap between Infinity War and Endgame to go to the loo, and holy crap, the entire foyer was just full of people. The second time I saw Endgame was about a week later. I went by myself in the middle of the afternoon to the Richmond Odeon in London, and I think there were maybe 7 other people in the screen. The third time I saw it in IMAX 3D at the Cineworld in Sheffield. Side note, I am not a huge fan of 3D. I feel like it got massively overused when I was younger and was just a lot of like, let's make everything 3D because we figured out the technology, so now let's increase the prices by twice what they usually are, and things will fly at your face for no real reason, and it doesn't affect the plot, and it doesn't help with the storytelling, and it's just there. I also personally can't always tell the difference between standard and HD. Sometimes I can't tell the difference at all, and then sometimes I'm like, sure, there is a tiny difference, but it doesn't actually affect how I experience the film, so it's not worth the extra like £7. So honestly, I was not looking forward to seeing it in IMAX, or like I wasn't super fussed. But the friend that I was going with really wanted to see it in IMAX. The difference was astounding. There was so much detail. IMAX was an experience. The screen was the size of a fucking theatre. It was huge. And yet it didn't feel overbearing or uncomfortable. It was just really fun. The 3D quality was also very different. Instead of being like, I'm gonna punch you and my whole fist comes forward, it was just that the depth was really incredible. So it felt like you were kind of stood just next to the camera while they were filming. Like, obviously you know it's not, but that kind of depth of like, you can tell such difference between the front of someone's shoulder and the wall behind them that you can't really get in like 2D film. I loved it. I would definitely go and watch something in IMAX again. Personally, I always try and watch a film, if I'm going to do a video on it, at least twice. The first time to just watch the film and experience it and enjoy it and kind of have some initial thoughts and things that I'm like, I wonder what I really think about that, let's focus on that for next time. And then the second time to kind of go through and think of things to say and take notes and kind of catch any bits that I missed, because I think there's so much happening in a film that you can't always get all of it the first go round, and especially with a film like Endgame that's 3 hours, I think there will be things that I have missed, and like even on the third time I think there will be things that I didn't quite catch. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the whole film and just kind of point out wherever there were things that I was like, I have an intense thought or feeling or question in the order of watching. The only exception to this is that when I get to the bit where they're all happening at the same time, I'm just going to group them together into like this character's bit and this character's, because trying to edit in the order that it actually happens in the film would be exhausting. Straight off the bat, fantastic opening. I really, really loved the bit with Clint and his daughter. Like, it was suspenseful, yet predictable, but still tense. I think that scene might be the most I've ever liked Clint. I'm not a huge Clint fan. I really liked the way that their, like, youngest kid was like, I want ketchup. And I don't know why I liked that so much. Like, partly I think it's because I really appreciate good child writing. I think often films can get kids really, really wrong, and I appreciate that this film felt like it didn't do that at any point. But I also was just kind of like, ketchup's such an obvious choice for a hot dog. Like, I like mayonnaise, probably more than the next person, but like, ketchup on a hot dog, it's just obvious. I want to know whether Violet's going to be in future stuff, because I couldn't tell whether his, like, calling her Hawkeye was a cool family joke thing and, oh, isn't it cute he calls his daughter Hawkeye, or whether it was set up for her joining the Avengers in a couple of years, because I think the next stage is obviously going to be like a young Avengers or the new Avengers. So, like, is she going to be in it? But also, do we really need someone with no powers who can just shoot a bow and arrow? It was quite a small thing, but I really enjoyed that when they did the kind of Marvel title thing, they only used clips of the people who hadn't vanished in the snap. I thought that was quite a nice little detail. Nebula and Tony on the spaceship is so adorable. Nebula smiles. There's like one frame where she smiles, and it's heartbreaking. It's utterly, utterly heartbreaking. Their playing, like, table football thing is so cute. I did not realise that I desperately wanted someone to, like, teach Nebula things about, like, really dull human stuff. But, oh, my heart. I loved it. I loved it so much. As is kind of always true, Robert Downey Jr. is very good at acting. Like, I think pretty much everybody did a spectacular job, but I think I noticed particularly him and a couple of other people. And in this scene particularly, I really noticed how well the CGI is. Like, he is slowly starving both of food and oxygen, and the CGI felt really well done. His acting was phenomenal, but I also felt like it paired really nicely with how they were doing the CGI and how he looked, which felt really, really believable. And I think CGI can be really hit or miss with that kind of thing, and MCU have time and time again managed to do them really, really well. This whole section while they're on the spaceship reminded me so much of an episode of Firefly called Out of Gas. I don't know if that was an inspo thing, but it just felt so similar. Does Nebula need oxygen? Because I cannot figure this out. She really doesn't look like she is anywhere near in as bad shape as Tony does during any of this, but I feel like we've seen her get strangled before and, like, need oxygen, but then she doesn't seem to be deprived of oxygen here. Gwyneth Paltrow can do some really impressive things with, like, subtle body movements and facial expressions that I really appreciated during this film. Like, I think I've enjoyed her acting in previous films, but this one it was so good. Everything she did felt so purposeful, and that it was all completely needed to tell a story. It didn't feel like she wasted any of her time on screen. Another moment of Nebula being completely heartbreaking, which she does several times during this film. Rocket and Nebula sitting on the steps of the spaceship and just holding hands. I very much enjoyed that, and it made me very, very sad. A thing that I kind of struggled with the first time I watched it was that, given how this section plays out, the implication that I got was that the post-credit scene from Captain Marvel happens after the snap, but before she rescues Tony and Nebula. It's not that they completely, like, pretended it didn't happen, but that it just happens at a point that we don't see in this film. So in my head, what happens is Infinity War, and he sends the signal, and then the opening scene with Clint in his farm, and then the post-credit scene from Captain Marvel where she turns up and is like, where's Nick Fury? And then the opening, kind of post-opening credit bit of Endgame. This is a pet peeve, and my god, I'm so fucking sick of people doing it. You cannot pull out an IV like that. It doesn't work. That is a needle in your arm. That is a tube that literally goes inside your body. If you pull it out, it's gonna fucking hurt and you're gonna bleed everywhere. It happens all the time in movies and in films. It happens all the time in TVs and in films. People just rip their IVs off like it's no issue. You can't fucking do that. A thing I only noticed on the third watch through is that Tony calls Steve a liar, and I am here for it. I love it when Steve gets called out on his bullshit, because Steve is full of bullshit. So when they're having that bit where Nebula's like, I know where he is, he's at the garden, and then Rocket's like, look, here's a map with the actual planet. Rocket finds that through, like, detecting cosmic energy. He didn't need Nebula to say he's at the garden. So why hadn't Rocket already found him? Like, if it happened 2 days ago, why couldn't Nebula just be like, he's on this planet, he's at the garden, it's this planet? One of those two things is the only thing you need. You didn't need both of them, and it makes Nebula look like she's not actually contributing anything. And also makes Rocket look like he's incompetent. It just reduces what Nebula says to basically being exposition rather than actually helping them find him. In my notes I've literally just written, I want the men to sit down when Carol is talking, and it is still true. There's nothing you can contribute that will be more important than what she says, so just sit down. It was at this point that I had another moment of like, oh my god, IMAX is amazing, because when they're flying into the planet that Thanos is hiding on, it's got rings around it, and you can actually see like shards of ice in the rings, whereas before it was just like, here's a generic ring around a planet. Thanos' garden is like some really weird mix of Skyrim and Shrek's swamp, and I found that so funny. Like, I don't think it's uncharacteristic or bad, I just found it really amusing. A friend of mine genuinely said before we saw the film that Thanos would be on a farm making pumpkin soup, all based off this idea from when he gives Gamora soup during Infinity War. And then we watched the film and he was effectively making pumpkin soup, but with pumpkins that are like alien pumpkins. Our whole row was just kind of beside ourselves giggling because he's making fucking pumpkin soup. That's what he does now. One of the reasons I really don't like Steve is because literally his reason for everything is, I don't think this is true, and therefore it's not. Or like, I don't believe this, therefore it has no consequences. And I'm like, you are not the rule. I'm just so fucking bored of Steve being such an asswipe. Like, acting as if just because he says something it magically becomes true. They have this whole interaction with Thanos on the farm about what's he done with the stones and everything. And he says a line that's, I am inevitable. And I'm just going to pause to talk about Thanos for a little bit. I feel like they really messed with Thanos' characterization in this film. And I can't tell if that's because I'm misremembering things, because it's been such a long time since I've seen any of the Phase 1 or Phase 2 films. But I feel like before this film, Thanos has been very clear that he is like a tool of the universe. And he's just doing his moral, like, assigned purpose job, and that it's not about like ego. He doesn't feel pride about this. He's actually quite devastated by what he has to do, but that he genuinely believes he has to do it. And then in this film he's like, I am inevitable. Like, that's such a kind of self-aggrandizing statement, and it felt really out of character. And I get that they really wanted to have the like mirroring of I am inevitable and I am Iron Man, but I just don't believe that Thanos would say, I am inevitable. Like, he would have said, it is inevitable, but I don't think he would have prided himself over the action. But maybe I'm misremembering things. Another point of Nebula just breaking my heart without even trying. Her character development throughout this franchise has been so unexpected. Like, I don't think I was very attached to Nebula during I wasn't attached to Nebula during the first Guardians film, and I was a little bit in the second one, and then a mild interest in her during Infinity War, and then in this film she just stepped up, like, all of the time. Every time she was on screen I was like, you are wonderful and I am so sorry for your struggles, and like, She was great. And I was glad that they didn't shy away from the brutality of this scene just because she was there. Thor straight up decapitates the only parental figure she's ever had in front of her, and she doesn't even cry. Obviously a sign of how deeply traumatic his upbringing was, but also, like, I love that she closes his eyes. I fucking hate him, but I'm so here for complicated family relations that aren't just played off as, like, you know they're a bad person, so you immediately hate them and it's really easy, because it's fucking not. And I loved it. And then we have the 5 big old years time pass thing. The first time I watched this, genuinely the whole screen audience just gasped. And I feel like that was definitely the effect they wanted to go for, that you were really surprised that it was going to just be left. The detail in some parts of the plot for this film were so good. The idea that you would definitely cry on a date, I think when you say it feels really weird and like, why would that be the case? But actually, if you think about it, everybody on this planet is now suffering from PTSD, because how fucking traumatizing would it be to watch half of the population turn to dust? I really liked that they were completely normalizing it, that it was like, yeah, of course, at some point during this, like, very emotional interaction, you are going to feel the need to cry. And I just really liked that. I thought that was a great tactic. That said, why the fuck is Steve running this group? Like, there's like 6 people in this room. Why is Steve running this group? There should be way more people attending this group if it's just about support for people now that the snap has happened. There would be loads more people who needed support. But also, why is Steve running this? He's not trained in mental health. He's not a therapist. He's got, actually, no experience in how to help people deal with mental health issues, depression, PTSD. He's just an old man. He's a mediocre white dude, so he thinks he can do whatever he wants. I liked the casual gayness. Who doesn't like casual gayness? But I don't like the way that the Russos have talked about it. I don't like the way that they've defended the writing and the casting of that role. And I don't like that they're trying to use this as like, look, representation by someone who doesn't have a name and says a total of 3 lines. That's not representation. There have been over 20 films in this franchise and not a single named character has been gay. This especially pissed me off in this film because Carol is very queer-coded throughout this film. Like, even more queer-coded than she was in her own film. And queer coding is not representation. Just make one of your characters gay. It's not hard. So we finally see Scott come back from the quantum realm, and I love the fact that, like, it's not a person or, like, a planned thing, it's just that there's a rat crawling over the control desk. It's a little bit for the sake of plot, but also it's random enough that it probably was just a random thing that could happen. But if they've moved all of his stuff into storage, how did nobody put the headset on? Feels odd to me that nobody tried to turn the machine on. Maybe Cassie wouldn't have done it, or Cassie's, like, mum and stepdad wouldn't have done that because it's a bit risky. But I do not believe for a second that Luis would not have just been like, oh, what does this button do? Press. Scott's friends are button-pushing kinds of people. I really liked the memorials. I thought they were very realistic, both in terms of, like, looked good, but also in terms of, like, that's totally what humanity would do. We'd definitely make fucking giant pillars with everybody's names on it. It's a tiny nitpick, but where did his trolley full of stuff go? He's purposefully lugging around this trolley out of the self-storage thing, and then he discovers that he's on one of these memorials, and just is like, fuck all of this shit, and runs to Cassie's house. I'm like, but do you need that stuff? I've seen a lot of people commenting on the actress of Cassie and how she looks really old and it doesn't look like 5 years have passed. She's 17. Like, the actress is actually 17. That's what a 17-year-old looks like. That said, I don't think the chemistry with this new actress was as good, which I think is a shame because I fucking love Cassie in the Ant-Man movies. That actress is really great. I love the chemistry between Cassie and Scott during the Ant-Man films, and I just didn't feel like it was there in this film. And possibly that's because they had like 4 lines to work with. But I would have liked it if they had managed some way of keeping the original actress, not least of all because I would quite like Cassie to be in future films as a superhero, and I think by the time they come back to the Ant-Man story, it's possible that that actress would be old enough to play a like 18, 19-year-old. And I love continuity of actors. I love it. Where is Cassie's mum and stepdad? And where is Louise? Like, I know it's a very long film. I know they've got a lot of characters that they need to, like, tell you what happened to them. And they did that a little bit at the beginning by having their floating heads listing who had vanished. But I want to know where these people are, and you haven't told me whether you're going to do another film about Ant-Man, so I don't know if I'm ever going to know. I want the information, Marvel. I want it. Then we have this conversation that happens at the Avengers base, and we see Carol for the first time after the 5-year gap. She's so queer-coded, I can't. That haircut is the most stereotypical lesbian haircut. And it's not even good. Like, it's good on some people, it's not good on Carol. That is a bad haircut on her. But it's the queer, lesbian, stereotypical haircut. So let's put her in a haircut that makes her look gay, so that we don't have to do any of the work of, like, making her gay. If you want more content on how really obvious it is that Carol's gay, Rowan Ellis did a really great video after the Captain Marvel film came out, and I'm going to link to it in the description. Speaking of haircuts, why is it that all of the women have to have, like, facial or hair indicators of the passage of time, but the men don't? The only men who have indicators of the passage of time are Thor and Hulk, and that's not, like, their face or their hair, that's, like, actual body, kind of, this is what's been happening to them over the course of 5 years. Natasha is the best she has ever been in this film. Her hair is terrible, though. This scene also confuses me, because when her and the kind of telecom conference is happening, and then when Steve comes in, it really looks and feels like it's nighttime. The windows are dark-ish and it seems dark outside. And then there's the live feed from the front gate with Scott, and that really looks like it's daytime. So which is it? Also, why wouldn't the Earth still need the Avengers? Like, just because half the universe is gone doesn't mean that all of the bad people have gone. Every time the Avengers have been needed hasn't actually just been Thanos. The idea that just because half the universe has disappeared suddenly means that everyone's great and shiny and happy is bullshit, and Steve is so obviously just kind of like, I've said it so it must be true. Scott trying to explain quantum mechanics was really, really fun, and Natasha saying only to make conversation. One of those things where I'm just like, that's so Natasha, and such a, like, small thing, but done really, really well. I love Morgan H. Stark. I would die for her. She is beautiful. Love it so much. She's so cute. Pet peeve that I noticed while this scene and a couple of others were happening. Half the universe has vanished. The world is in disrepair. Humanity is only just 5 years later getting back on its feet. But you know what's survived all of this really well? Swanky Audi car production. Like, they're driving brand new fucking cars. Another instance of Steve being a complete twat. Tony basically is like, we could fuck things up even worse than they already are. And Steve is just like, I don't think we would. Good for you, Steve. It doesn't matter what you think. If it's a possibility, that's a risk that needs to be considered. Stop being such a twat. I really enjoyed that Tony's reasoning actually made a lot of sense and was well delivered and wasn't just kind of like him being melodramatic. Because I think one of the things that I struggled with in Civil War was that even when Tony was right, he was very bad at communicating why he was right, and it felt like they were just being purposefully obtuse with each other. This time, I felt like he was totally right, he explained it really, really well, and that they understood and respected it, and that's why they went to somebody else. Whereas I feel like if it had done the thing from Civil War, they just would have had more of an argument about it, and Tony would have just been like, no, I'm not going to bother, whereas actually he was like, these are the reasons that I'm not going to do this. Then we get to meet Smart Hulk, Bruce Hulk, whatever you want to call him. I quite liked this scene. I really liked the normalising of, like, eating in this film. They were eating all the fucking time. I left the cinema more hungry than I had been all day, because they literally eat so many different types of food during that film. The conversation with the kids where Scott's like, do you want a photo with me? I'm Ant-Man, was so cringy and awkward to watch. It was funny the first time, and then the second 2 times it was so difficult to watch, and I just wanted it to be over. The first time I watched the film, I kind of misunderstood how it was that Banner had become this version of Hulk, and I thought it was that when the snap had happened, because Hulk is like the only version in the MCU that is this like human Hulk thing, that half of both of him had vanished. And so what was left was like the other half Hulk, half human section. But actually I much prefer what they did and the plotline of that this is actually a character development thing and that he kind of did this to himself as a kind of development but also a coping mechanism, I think. I really liked Bruce's character development through this film. I felt like the arc that he has been on since Ragnarok, or actually even since Age of Ultron, if you watch just for kind of Bruce and Hulk's relationship from Age of Ultron through Ragnarok and Infinity War and then to Endgame, I really, really like the resolution. I like the way that that's played out and that his kind of solution is not getting rid of the Hulk or kind of learning how to be Bruce some of the time and Hulk some of the time, but is actually like, we're one person, we're just the extreme ends of each, and what we need to do is like balance in the middle. Small children swearing is a beautiful thing, and I love it when it happens in real life, and I love it when it happens in film, and Morgan saying shit is just adorable. Was Happy snapped at the end of Infinity War? Because where the fuck is he? I don't believe for a second that Happy would just be like, yeah, Tony, move out into the middle of the countryside with your wife and your child and I'll just never talk to you. He would ring. And I feel like it would make sense for Happy to have been snapped. Another thing of like beautiful character development, I fucking love Pepper's journey. Pepper from Iron Man 1 to Endgame is such an impressive journey, and so much of it is about her learning that she cannot prevent any of the bad things happening. She can't prevent the scary things happening. She can't even stop Tony obsessing about them. And she just has learned to accept that. And I was so glad that scene between Tony and Pepper where he's like, I could just stop. I think Pepper from a couple of films ago would have been like, we have Morgan, don't mess with that. Pepper, at this point, she doesn't say it, but I think she was willing to risk Morgan much more than Tony was, because I think for her it was a risk that had to be taken. It was the right thing to do. I just really like that, and like obviously a lot of this is inferred, but I liked that a lot of the things that happened in this film were so well done that you could tell a whole bunch of other things from them. So she doesn't have very many lines in that scene, but what I got from that is she has become much more adjusted to him being Iron Man. She has accepted that he is always going to be the kind of person who needs to protect people, who needs to be working. She understands that she massively lucked out in what happened and what was a global and universal tragedy, and that she knows that well enough to know that actually if she told Tony to put it away and to not figure out how to do time travel, she would be the bad person, even if that meant risking her own daughter. I really enjoyed Bruce and Natasha's flirting in this film. I was one of the few people who quite liked Bruce and Natasha's relationship in Age of Ultron, and I enjoyed the parts in Ragnarok and Infinity War where it's clear that there's a thing that needs to happen there, but they don't have time for it. And I really liked that in this film it wasn't just that it was still a thing they needed to deal with. They'd obviously dealt with it. It's been 5 years. Whatever they are is whatever they are, and that's not important to us, because it doesn't matter. It really seemed like to me they had obviously like worked their shit out quite early on in the 5 years, and they had been like together for a while. It's the version of together where they're like living apart and doing other things, but they're also like having sex whenever they see each other. And I just really liked it, okay? I like subtle, this is a different style of relationship, but they're fine with each other, and I enjoyed that. Hulk's dab was great. The amount of kind of like, this is for the fans thing in this film was really great. The dab was one of them, and I really enjoyed it. The New Asgard is possibly the most beautiful place on Earth. It looks gorgeous. It was so cute. I cried because the Asgardians have been through so much, and now they have a home, and it makes me really happy. And then we see, for the first time since the snap, Thor. Let's just pause a minute to talk about fat Thor. First time that I watched this film, I basically had a panic attack for the entire time that he was on screen during this scene. Because basically as soon as we saw him, the entire screen audience started to laugh. And not like giggles, but like properly laughing. Like, I think that was the biggest laugh that the whole film got, was just Thor on screen. It was horrible. After the film finished, I just had to like stay in my seat and cry for 10 minutes. And I spent most of the time that Thor was on screen during the first time I watched this film just crying, because people were just laughing the whole time. I don't think I've ever had quite as visceral a reaction to a film as that. And when I originally thought of doing this video, it was actually just going to focus on Fat Thor and how that affected me and why I thought it was a bad idea. And then I went to rewatch the film and I saw it a second time where there was hardly anybody in the screen. And it was so much better because I think during the first time, because of the audience reaction, I had like ascribed that the film was doing all of this stuff of framing it, intending for the audience to laugh. But the second time I watched it, that just didn't come across at all. He is fat and there are issues that I have with the way that they handled that. But the film doesn't, as far as I could tell, intend for you to find it funny that he's fat. Those scenes are set up as being full of self-hatred and self-pity and sadness, and that you're supposed to feel sad and sorry and a bit uncomfortable, but you're not supposed to find it funny. Rocket is still really mean to him, but Rocket's mean to everybody, and there are still issues with how they handled having him be fat in this film. So they used a fat suit rather than a body double or CGI, and why did they choose to do that when they could have done something that would have looked more realistic and also not caricatured fat people? And while I don't think the film wanted Thor to be a joke, I think there were definitely ways that they could have improved and thought about more the fact that audiences are going to laugh unless you teach them and guide them not to. And that can be done. There are more and more shows where there are fat characters who aren't just the butt of jokes. But if you just insert a fat character and you don't frame it very intentionally, people will laugh. Because that's what the whole rest of films and television have taught them to do. People making this film should have been more aware of that. And I really doubt that there was anybody involved in the like decision-making process of any of Thor's scenes who was fat. It doesn't read like it. There were points with the framing, with the way that he interacted with the world, other people interacted with him, and how the film kind of directed the audience to behave, that made it clear that this was, oh, we should do this and it'll be fun. And no one had kind of thought, doing this will have wider implications and we should think about how we do it. I think it was a great move, but they needed to think more about it, and I don't feel like they did. I really liked that Hulk's response to seeing Thor in this way was not to belittle him, was not to make fun of him, was not to kind of say, pull yourself together, we need you, but was actually just to kind of say, I have been here, I have been in this really dark place where you are, and do you know who helped me? It was you, and that's why I'm coming to you, not just because we need you, but also because you're my friend, and this is not a fun place for you to be. We have a brief scene of Clint being evil, and just where was this level of skill at literally any other point? I am not super fussed by time travel in this film needing to make an exact sense, but they do explain it. It's sliding doors, not Back to the Future. I really enjoyed using the kind of where are the stones as a way of recapping everything that's happened in the last 11 years. I thought that was a really clever method of kind of being like, here's a refresher course on all of the early films without having to be like, this is what we did 10 years ago. I was really surprised that this was how they were going to do time travel. I figured that after Infinity War they did need to do some travelling through time, but I really thought it was going to be the time stone. I really liked that they did this instead. I thought it was different. So what if the science doesn't really work? It was interesting. It made for a good story. The fitting in of the old footage was done really, really well. Whoever did all of that, well done. You did a really, really good job. I didn't think it was a noticeable difference between footage that was filmed for this film and footage that was filmed for a film that came out in, 2012? That's 7 years of difference, and I couldn't really tell the difference at all. I really loved gratuitous violence Hulk. I thought that line was really cute. How does nobody in this film and this entire franchise have any spatial awareness or the ability to hear anything. Like, they're literally wandering around in this room with all of them from the previous version just standing there and nobody notices. If you were pumped full of adrenaline after just having, like, battled for the safety of the universe, you would notice the person just creeping around, like, 3 meters away from you. Also, no one noticing anything. How did nobody notice the briefcase that had the Tesseract in it just fly like 10 feet along? Somebody would notice. I'm so glad that they didn't just redo the elevator fight scene and, like, they made it really tense and feel like they were going to do it, and then they just diffused all of that tension. I personally really enjoyed the use of, like, Hail Hydra as a thing to kind of circumvent what you expected to happen, and it was like a nod to what's happening in the comics at the minute. But I know that the stuff that's been happening in the comics has been really not great and upset and offended quite a lot of people, so I'm open to the idea that this maybe wasn't the best plan for them to include in the film. Why doesn't the old Cap, like, from 2012 question the fact that Cap from the present day has a shield? Like, if he thinks it's Loki and he's, like, pretending to look like him, Loki can't pretend a shield. That's not... He's just the person. Tony being revived by the hammer was really fun. I get that Loki disappearing is probably going to be addressed in the Disney Plus show, but I would have liked it if somebody could have mentioned, like, if Bruce could have said, there's only so much we can fix because we can just return the stones, but we can't fix things like Loki running off or something. I want someone to acknowledge that they can't fix all of the timeline fractures because of shit like this, and they just didn't, and I would like them to acknowledge that somewhere. I don't want to call it fan service because that's really strongly associated with, like, things that are ridiculous and nobody thinks would actually be a good idea, but I liked all of the little nods that they did. So America's ass, and the scene where Steve's like, I could do this all day, and he's like, I know. One thing they didn't address in this film, and I'm hopeful that they're going to address in the next couple of films that come out, if you remove the stones from their time, that kind of fucks with reality. But then Thanos has just literally destroyed all of them in the present day, so what does that do to our reality that the stones are now just destroyed? Like, not missing, destroyed. With the Nebula and Gamora and Thanos plotline, I felt again like their characterization was a bit off, and I'd need to rewatch Guardians, but it felt like they were all too emotional. Like, Gamora particularly, when we meet her, is very, very emotionless. Thanos, who has known her for years and is paying attention to what she does, I feel like would very quickly notice that she doesn't actually want to follow him, because it was really fucking obvious. The cut of Star-Lord dancing from the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy was pure gold, and I loved it so much. I really enjoyed Rhodey and Nebula having a discussion about, like, how their bodies have been changed. I would love to hear more about that. We haven't actually had much interaction as an audience with Rhodey about his life, kind of ever, and I think that's been still quite true even after the end of Civil War, and so I really enjoyed this scene with him and Nebula kind of bonding over everything that we don't get to talk about much within the MCU, which is that, like, actually this job is quite risky, not just in terms of death, but also it can fuck with you and your body and your ability to live. They had a ship, they had like a mini spaceship pod. Were they literally just going to leave that there? Or were Natasha and Clint supposed to pick it up on their way? Why was the ship there other than for plot, so that she could ring them and struggle to get hold of them? I mostly really enjoyed the scene with Thor and his mum, but her last 2 lines before he kind of summons the hammer really pissed me off. She's done this big speech about, like, don't be who you're meant to be who you are, and then she says, go, be who you're supposed to be. And I'm like, supposed to and meant to mean the same thing. You've just done this big speech about be who you are. Why would you not say, go be who you are? That would have made so much more sense. And also, telling him to eat a salad, fuck off. Because that's not how it works. The rest of that scene, the rest of their interaction had been really, really lovely. And after speaking with a couple of other people, it felt not only like a kind of fat-phobic, oh, you should eat a salad thing, but also a, like, misogynistic undertone thing of, what do mums do? They tell you what to eat. And it's just, like, the scene would have been better. It wasn't a funny line. It undercut the tension in a way that made it less impressive when he summoned the hammer. It just wasn't needed. They could have just cut that line entirely and the scene would have been really emotional and moving. And instead it was like really undercut by this weird line. And I think it then meant that when he did summon the hammer, that was less impressive and less of a kind of momentous thing, because it would just been like paced really weirdly. And him discovering that he's worthy and like reaffirming that he is worthy of being Thor should have been this like really big moment in his arc, and instead it felt subdued. And I think partly that was the line, partly it was the way that they edited that scene, and partly it was the score for that moment felt like it was just a kind of cool, now we're gonna win, rather than a like big emotional impact moment. Stan Lee's cameo was great and cute and made me cry every time. I thought it was really cute and serendipitous that his last line as a cameo is "make love not war." It was just really cute and it made me cry. Tony and his dad's interactions are very adorable, even if Howard was a terrible dad. And I really like the idea of him asking Tony for parenting advice. The advice that Tony gives is really cute, even if it's basically like, you're gonna be a great dad, even though he isn't. It was a cute interaction. I really liked how freaked out Tony was throughout that entire interaction. It was really good. Again, with the spatial awareness thing, how does Peggy not notice him? He's literally pressed up against the glass, literally right next to her. He's almost breathing condensation and writing "I love you" on the glass. You would notice. You would just notice. Maybe she did notice him but pretended not to. Like, I don't know how it would work with the time travel. Does that Peggy in that moment know? Like, is she living with Steve at home and he told her, oh, I travelled back in time on this date in 1970, so you've got to pretend not to notice me? Because I could believe that. I could buy that. My one big plot thing that I would have done differently is that I think Clint should have died. Natasha has an arc, all of these really impressive character developments that had been happening for years. Clint's just there when they need him. Like, he doesn't really have a character development, and it would make sense for somebody who knows how the Avengers works, knows the kind of things that you need to know in order to lead a team, and has done all of this developing, to be the new person to lead the Avengers. And there's supposedly a Black Widow movie coming out, and instead they killed Natasha, which basically I think means that the Black Widow movie is gonna be like an origin story, and like, fine, I guess. But I really want something more interesting for her. She has been in as many movies as Steve, and none of them have been her own. And now she's dead and didn't ever really get a moment to actually be in the spotlight. Even that scene is not really hers. It's her and Clint's scene. If they had to go with Natasha dying, there were several things that I thought they could have done differently. I really think at least one of them should have said, "I have red in my ledger," because that would have been a really nice callback to the beginning of their arc. There were lots of great times when the score was really, really good during this film, but I think what they could have done that would have been even more heartbreaking is, instead of having music, that as soon as she lets go of Clint, that there's silence, that there's no music, that she falls, and the only sound is her body hitting the ground. Because I think that would have been more intense and more visceral a reaction from the audience. I also didn't like that they basically put her in exactly the same pose. So they used the same music and then they put her in the same pose on the ground as Gamora. It made both of them less impactful. I just really liked Thor's arc in this film. I was really glad that what they did was actually that he was depressed. I thought that was a good variation on what normally happens for him and made a lot of sense. And I was glad that it was him and not like Tony or Steve, because I feel like they get a lot of attention. And actually, Thor's character arc in this film showed, even down to things like him volunteering to use the glove and him ushering Rocket behind him when they're preparing for Hulk to snap his fingers. I'm also really glad that they actually reacted with some level of like, this could go badly for us, with the idea of the Hulk snapping his fingers. If it's more gamma radiation, then he could get even bigger, he could become really rageful, and I just liked that they thought about that and were like, we should protect ourselves and each other. How did Thanos have enough particles to get all of those spaceships through? Like, I don't understand that. It's not a huge deal. I'm fine to be accepting that this is just what happens in the movie and you just roll with it. But how did he get all of those ships through? Where did all of that backup come from? How does that work? How did those creatures get down in the bottom of this, like, weird sewer system that are Thanos's, like, mutant animal things? How did they get there? They were all a little bit protected by plot, like, there's this big explosion, but none of them are hurt, the glove isn't damaged, all of the, like, ways that they need to get out of the building are accessible, just for plot, isn't it? I kind of wish that they had mentioned the Warriors 3, because then the scene with Cap and Tony and Thor would have felt like more of a parallel. The fight scene between them and Thanos was really good, I really liked the choreography, and I really liked that Thor fought the same, that he wasn't like having to bend over all the time to catch his breath or anything. He was Thor, he was just also fat. I did really like the fact that when the building collapses we do get to see Rocket being actually scared, which I think is something that we haven't really seen in the first two Guardians films. Like, in the second film there's obviously a bit of his character development and a bit of emotional insight into him, but I don't think we've ever really seen him actually terrified. We've seen him mourning, and we've seen him sad, and we've seen him self-deprecating, but I really liked this film in general, and particularly that scene of seeing Rocket's emotional depth, and I'm really hoping that they kind of continue this trend of having him being more upfront about how he's feeling in the next Guardians film. Do you need to be worthy to hold Thor's axe, or is it just the hammer? Because Thanos pushes the axe into Thor's face, and in previous films, if Thor hasn't wanted the hammer to move, the hammer doesn't move. So I can't tell whether it's that you don't need to be worthy, or whether Thanos is worthy, or whether it was a mistake. I personally wasn't super thrilled by Steve being able to hold the hammer. I know that lots of other people were, there was lots of cheering. Steve is my least favourite character, so I really wasn't that excited for him to pick up the hammer. I would have been so excited if it had been Carol or Natasha, Peter even. The hug between Tony and Peter when they've all come back and they've all joined the fight is genuinely so cute. I'm so glad that we got a bit of closure about their relationship, because I think at the point that Peter vanishes, their relationship on Peter's side still doesn't really feel that emotively giving, and I'm so glad that they hugged, that we got a scene of the two of them before Tony died. Slight pet peeve, how are they all magically on the same comms network? They're all just talking to each other through their little earpieces, and that kind of makes sense for, like, the original Avengers and the people who, like, were on the Avengers network, but A, are we supposed to believe that in 5 years they haven't updated their comms network? And B, what about all these other fucking people? How are they on the same comms network? It really bugged me. I really loved seeing Wanda and her anger. I'm really excited about the idea of seeing more of her, because although she's been in quite a few films, she hasn't had as much focus time. I really want to see more of her, and I'm intrigued how they're going to do this Disney Plus show of Scarlet Witch and Vision, because Vision's dead. I really loved the reference back to the Spider-Man Homecoming film with instant kill. It's character development in a very strange way that I'm really happy that this, like, 16-year-old boy is gonna instantly kill people, but it made me really happy. I liked the reunion between Rocket and Groot, although I think I would have preferred it to be slightly longer. I really wanted there to be slightly more emotional payoff for the reunion of the Guardians, and I know they haven't really been the focus of this story. I feel like there was a lot about them during the first film, and then we didn't really get a thing of them being together, and we didn't get very much of Rocket. His response to them all coming back would have been a big deal for him. Like, they're his whole family. He's obviously gone through quite a lot in the past 5 years that they have just missed, and I wanted them to kind of address that a little bit, and it wasn't focused on very much, so I'm really, really, really hoping that the Guardians 3 film doesn't just, like, jump super far forward and we never kind of get that initial emotional payoff. The one bit in this film that I think I actually hated, like, I didn't like Natasha's death and I didn't like that decision, but I'm okay with it. Fucking hated the woman wall. It's the most pandering, patronising bit of cinema. I hate it. I hate it so much. I have seen arguments that say, oh, there are little girls who are now going to see this wall of superheroes who are all women, and isn't that great? I feel like that argument is like, here's the base level of oppression, and it's one teeny tiny fraction above that. Isn't that the best thing ever? And I'm like, no, it's not. Yeah, it's great that there are girls who can now grow up knowing that there are superheroes who look like them and behave like them. But actually, having this wall of women that don't know each other, have never spoken to each other, have no reason for all of them to just be the ones who are going to walk across this field. Hope literally fucking abandons a more important job. She is fixing the quantum realm machine that's in the back of the van, and she fucks off, leaving Scott to do it, who is not a quantum physicist. He doesn't know the science. He's just the crash test dummy. But she fucks off and leaves him to do that so that she can walk in a line with other women. Isn't even necessary, because Carol Danvers is the strongest fucking character in the whole franchise. He's like, I don't know how you're gonna get it through all of that. And they're like, oh, she won't be alone. She doesn't need your help. She literally just flew through a fucking giant space slug. She doesn't need your help. And it's so patronising in every bit. It's patronising to Carol because she doesn't need that support. It's patronising to the idea that all women need to see in superhero movies is women in a line walking forward, and that's enough, which it isn't. The fact that it looks good is somehow going to make up for the fact that it detracts from the storytelling. I think especially annoying because the bit in Infinity War where Scarlet Witch and Black Widow and Okoye are fighting the blue-faced baddie Thanos child woman, that was really good. That was really well done. And part of what I really liked about that was that it didn't feel over the top. It happened to be that they were the closest people to the fight, and the fight became for people who just happened to be women interacting in a way that made sense. That scene was so good, and this was so obviously trying to capitalise on that, but it didn't understand why the scene in Infinity War had been good. It was just like, oh, they were in the same place and they had boobs. Let's do that again. And I'm like, that's not the bit. That's so not the bit. I think having I Am Iron Man as the tag of that scene was actually a really good idea. I still have a bit of a problem with the I am inevitable thing, but I do like the mirror. Thanos' kind of obsession and Tony's obsession being parallels to each other. I did like that, and I did like the use of I Am Iron Man as a parallel to Thanos. I have been saying for years that I thought that Tony was gonna die, not in a battle and not in a really big way, but that I thought he was gonna have a heart attack, because there have been many suggestions that Tony is going to have a heart attack through several films, thinking that they were going to get him to have a heart attack, and it wasn't going to be a big battle. It was going to be like after a battle that they were all getting on, everything was fine. It was going to be like the epilogue bit, and then he was just going to have a heart attack. Peter was going to be there but not really be able to do anything because it's a heart attack. It's not a supervillain. And that was going to be kind of Peter's parental figure dying, but also a lesson about that it's not just supervillains and like extraterrestrials and things that can kill you, but that like Iron Man died from a heart attack. So I was kind of hoping that they were going to do that. That said, I really liked this death. I thought it was well done. It wasn't what I was expecting, but I did still really like it. I thought it managed to have all of the emotional payoff that it needed to have as a scene really well, and it felt like a very big moment despite only really having 4 characters involved. I cried a lot. I will probably cry if I keep thinking about it, so I'm going to move on. I really want Peter and Cherie to meet. Like, I know it wasn't an appropriate time in the middle of that fight, but I just want them to meet. I want young superheroes to complain about all of the old people together. I want it so bad. Tony's voice message felt very on brand, and I really liked it, and it was a very nice way of kind of summing things up, and I Love You 3000 made me cry like a little baby. You cannot convince me otherwise that Peter does not babysit for Morgan all the time. I'm really excited to see how Peter and Happy behave now that Tony's gone. And I'd really like it if in the Spider-Man Far From Home film there was at least some mention of Pepper and Morgan. Like, I don't want it to be that because Tony has died, they're just not mentioned at all. Like, I think Marvel has a habit of kind of going, who are the main characters? We have to mention them. And who are the secondary men characters, and then they kind of forget about the families. I really want them to mention Pepper and Morgan, like, even if it's something really small, like Aunt May telling Peter that Pepper's rung and he should ring them back or something. I really liked Tony's funeral, but it did bug me that we didn't get any sort of memorial for Natasha or for Vision. It would have been really easy to send 3 wreaths out, and it wasn't like it was a celebrity funeral where there were papers and everything. The people who knew Tony also knew Natasha and Vision, and it bothered me that they didn't even have a little thing, like, even if it was the bit afterwards, the scene by the lake, there was an extra thing that was just the main Avengers having a memorial thing for Vision and Nat. There was nothing. Where was Nakia? I can understand her not being there in Infinity War, and I can almost understand her not being there in, like, the final battle if she had been snapped and then came back while she was still on mission or something. But the funeral takes place quite a while after. Where is she? As I've said previously, I'm not a huge Clint fan, and I think it would have been a more interesting and emotional scene if instead of Clint and Wanda, it had been Bruce and Wanda. I really liked that Thor handed things over to Valkyrie. That felt really fitting. Thor's never enjoyed being king. He likes being the prodigal son. He wants to be able to go off and do his own thing and then come back and have people pat him on the back. He doesn't lead. He's not a leader, and that's fine. I really liked that. As soon as he has finished saying to Valkyrie, you lead Asgard, I'm not a leader, he then goes and has this, like, pissing contest with Quill about who's the leader of the Guardian of the Galaxies. You've literally just handed off being leader. You don't want to be leader. Why are you having this argument with Quill? Just don't do it. I'm also a little bit wary about the Guardians 3 film. I'm really excited for it, and I'm glad that James Gunn is back. However, he has a habit of being quite fatphobic, and I'm a bit worried about how he's going to handle Thor. And I'm really hoping that they're not just going to be like, magic, he's thin again. Him being fat, I think that's good. I don't want it to be handled like a joke, and I'm worried that James Gunn is going to play it like a joke. I can believe that Steve picked up a new shield from Wakanda, got T'Challa to make him a new one or to get a new one and brought it over. I can accept that. What I can't quite understand, because of how the time travel works, when time travel splits, does it just copy completely apart from that one change? And if so, have we always been living, like the audience, have we always been living in a timeline where Steve has gone back in time and lived with Peggy? Or has he travelled from one branch reality to ours? That needs addressing. I'm supposed to believe that Steve, I can't shut my own mouth for 30 seconds, Rogers, has done literally nothing for 5 decades. I full well accept that he wouldn't have gone and saved Bucky, because he knows that that doesn't actually save his friend Bucky from torture, and that he knows that fucking with things would create a branch reality. But I do not believe that he could sit there and do nothing and just be a house husband for 50 years. I also think it's a shame that they didn't even let Peggy speak. I do really like that Sam is going to be the new Captain America. I'm intrigued and confused about how they're going to manage that with the Disney Plus show that I think they are still calling the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. He's Captain America now. I saw a post that went round after the film came out that was like, I remember how excited all of these young black kids were when Black Panther came out about having a superhero on screen who looked like them, and how having a black Captain America is going to do the same again. And that's just fucking love representation in mainstream media. It does so much good, and I'm so excited for it to get better. The last thing I have to say is that I really liked the credits. I thought having those kind of look at the actors who've been involved in a heavy way thing was quite nice, and making the original 6 into a kind of actually special, this is their last credits kind of thing. I know that some of them might still be involved in other films. I'm hoping that they keep Mark Ruffalo as Bruce for a little bit, because I would really like him to be a kind of like science dad of the next Avengers film, and wearing knitwear and making sure they've all got packed lunches when they go on their adventures. He's just, I love it. I really liked this movie. Was it perfect? No. Were there things I think could have been improved? Absolutely. But I really liked this film. I think it did a fantastic job of wrapping up a lot of, effectively, like 20 plus movies have gone into telling this story. And while I've seen some people kind of saying, oh, it's the end of Marvel. It's not the end of Marvel. This is still just a chapter in a much longer story. They haven't got any plans to slow down production. And it's not the end, but it is an end. And I think they did a really good job of kind of wrapping up enough loose threads that it felt conclusive and like at least a pause, without wrapping so much up that when they have the next film out, you're like, oh, but they've answered everything. What else is there to say? 16 out of 17 rating from me. Please, if you've got thoughts about this film, leave them in the comments, because I want to talk. I could talk for literally hours about this film, as I'm sure you can tell by how much of this video you've watched. I'll see you next week.